Sometimes I still can't wrap my head around the fact that it's been nearly 25 years since X-Men the Animated Series blessed us with one of the best Marvel shows of all time. And no, I'm not exaggerating one bit here, because back in the early 90s, Marvel wasn't exactly a Hollywood powerhouse. To come from there and land one of the most successful animated series of the era was a feat in itself. And the fact that people still regard this so highly tells you all that you need to know about its legacy. For me, it was the perfect gateway into the extensive comic book lore featuring Professor X and his super team of mutant students known as the X-Men. I mean, the show did start with almost 30 years of comics history, and the masterstroke was probably how the creators used it so perfectly without being spoilt for choice. I think X-Men 97 is a near perfect follow-up to this legendary series, and I'm glad that the show still continues through in a modern lens. But make no mistake, the iconic 90s series still holds a special place in the hearts of die-hard fans like me. In this video, I'm going to celebrate the legacy and bring you the stories of how the show actually came together and how it really ended, to set up a continuation nearly 2 decades later. Before the mutant revolution, how X-Men became a 90s cartoon phenomenon. I began this video by telling you that Marvel was nowhere close to its modern-day success back in the day, and X-Men the Animated Series was probably one of the most daring stunts attempted on TV. Marvel had failed to find any luck on the big screen or on television, and the only significant achievement was the entertaining but campy The Incredible Hulk, which ran from the late 70s into the early 80s on CBS. But it surely wasn't enough to encourage the producers to invest in another major run. Well, this is where TV executive Margaret Loesch played a key role. She always believed that Marvel had the potential to attract a steady TV audience, and she kept pitching shows to the networks. I really find it inspiring how she never really gave up on her vision, even though she was refused so many times by so many networks. She was particularly keen on working something with the X-Men narrative because it was easily one of the most moving and mature stories in the entirety of Marvel Comics. You have a ragtag team of mutants who have their own struggles to deal with. They're led by the knowledgeable and righteous Professor Charles Xavier, who strongly believes in a peaceful coexistence between mutants and humans. He guides them through a harsh world where they spend as much time in protecting the public as they spend in saving themselves from that same public, because mutant hate is a real thing. They're feared and hated, and yet they must find it in themselves to be the bigger individuals and work for peace and love. If that's not heavy-duty stuff for animation, I don't know what is. But it's easy for me to say that today. Back in the late 80s, when Margaret Loesch was fighting to bring this to TV, it wasn't very convincing for others. Also, it didn't help her, because that earlier failed pilot, the 1980s Pride of the X-Men, didn't make for a very good first impression. We did get Wolverine with a prominent Australian accent, but it didn't work at all. And Loesch now knew not to repeat her mistakes. I would say a genuine turn of events was triggered when she started her journey as the CEO of Fox Kids in 1990. Finally, she had the power to execute her vision, or at least to have people take her seriously about her ambitions. She convinced the then Fox head Jamie Kellner to greenlight an X-Men series, and this was literally staking her career on the success of the show. As you can imagine, if the show failed after she pushed it so hard, it would be the end of her comfortable run as one of the chief executives. But fate had other plans. She also convinced Haim Saban of Saban Entertainment and production company Graz, and after years of struggle and development, the pilot episode aired on October 31st, 1992 on Fox Kids. I think the primetime 7 p.m. slot for the show was also a bold choice initially, even though it later regularly aired on Saturday mornings. You might think that it was a smooth run from here on, but it was pretty far from it. There were some costly production delays that meant that the rest of the season would only air from January 1993. As the founder of Saban Entertainment said during an interview, "We quickly hired a small studio to help us produce the episodes, since we didn't have sufficient staff at the time to handle this complicated production in-house." And this was only the beginning of the setbacks that the series encountered. Even for the opening credits to X-Men, there was a bit of a fight with X-Men co-creator Stan Lee, lobbying to narrate the opening credits, and artist Larry Houston packing more characters than Fox was comfortable with. I said that the show was one of the most successful superhero animated shows on TV, but I never said it was without any controversies, and I'll come to that later in this video. But even if I keep the controversies aside, the show had to endure a lot. Firstly, there were competing corporate interests, and it was a bloodbath out there given the kind of competition during the early 90s. Secondly, the producer was obsessed with cost cutting, which meant that the creative visions often had to be compromised. Lastly, there was a genuine threat from the creative staff to to quit after a merchandising initiative went wrong, but nothing could jeopardize the show and its bold narrative. And the end result is a flawless run that's still regarded so highly in the industry. What was X-Men the Animated Series actually based on? I can't stress enough the greatness of the concepts that were brought to life in X-Men the Animated Series, but the core value still lies in the comic books. Maybe the best thing that the showrunners did was adapt some of the best X-Men comic books smartly to make them fit for television. The mutant superheroes working in a setup that was perfect for a civil rights allegory proved to appeal to both young and old alike, and the stories and context were easily the greatest asset of the show. It was particularly focused on Marvel Comics X-Men from the 1970s to the early 1990s comic era. If you look at the lineup and the costumes, you will realize that they were heavily influenced by the Jim Lee and Chris Claremont era, and you can see various important storylines such as Days of Future Past, the Phoenix Saga, the Dark Phoenix Saga, Age of Apocalypse's elements, Weapon X, Genosha, and the Apocalypse stories. Of course, the show also created some original plots that later influenced the comics as well. The series premiere comes with the Night of the Sentinels, and this is loosely adapted from the Silver Age Sentinel storyline from X-Men Volume 1, number 14. Again, Days of Future Past is a loose adaptation of Claremont and Byrne's Uncanny X-Men number 141 to 142, which tells the story of Bishop traveling from a dystopian future, where Sentinels rule after the assassination of Senator Robert Kelly by an X-Men traitor. One of my personal favorites in the entire franchise has to be the Dark Phoenix Saga, and it's amazing how the story still gives me the chills, even after over 40 years after its comic book publication. Some fans even call this the greatest Marvel story ever created, and I don't think they're completely wrong. You see, by the time the Dark Phoenix Saga ran through Uncanny X-Men numbers 129 to 138 in 1980, it was already the best-selling comic book, and in many ways, this actually redefined the X-Men for a new generation of readers. The premise was laid with the introduction of the Phoenix Force in Uncanny X-Men number 101, and it all came together in the Dark Phoenix Saga. The story follows the defeat of the X-Men in a fight with the Hellfire Club, and Mastermind uses his mind-controlling powers to unleash the darkness that's already building inside Jean. Once the Dark Phoenix is born, the X-Men have to figure out a way to stop her without hurting Jean. And it feels like the X-Men have to deal with an angry god here. You can imagine how thrilling it was to see this story in the animated series, and I still remember every scene of it as the X-Men struggle to bring Jean Grey back. I'm also a fan of the 4-part Season 4 finale, Beyond Good and Evil, which introduced Apocalypse as the ultimate villain in the series. It also united the heroes across space and time to battle the evil Mastermind as he planned to kidnap the world's best psychics to throw off the axis of time and destroy the universe. I don't remember the stakes being higher than this too many times. There are several other brilliant comic book narratives that have been adapted in this series, and it's a good thing that Marvel has an official comic guide that connects the animated episodes to the comics that inspired them. Personally, I feel the biggest success was the choice that suited the times perfectly. The stories felt relevant, and in fact they still do. Such was the faithful and innovative adaptations combining heavy elements like mutant prejudice, moral complexity, family dynamics, and of course, loads of action to keep us entertained. The final episode explained what happens in Graduation Day. All good things must end, and this is where things eventually ended for X-Men the Animated Series. Graduation Day was not just a random episode for the fans, and it carried the weight of expectations for everyone who thought that the show deserves a proper closure. And the episode didn't disappoint as a final episode. You'll understand how big a deal this is when you find out about the budgetary cuts and the animation quality degradation that the 5th season experienced, and I'll come to that in a little bit. As for now, let me take you through the story that sums up after such an eventful run, with so many brilliant stories that entertained fans for so long. I love how the episode begins so dramatically, and immediately from the onset, you know that something big is about to happen. Henry Peter Gyrich is a strong advocate for containing mutant rights, and he goes on a hate-filled rant against the threat posed by mutants to human existence. He's determined to get the mutant containment bill passed, and he pitches to Congress about all the dangers posed by mutants around the world. In order to support his claim, he even cites examples of mutants who have caused damage and destruction around the world. But he has a worthy opponent because Charles Xavier is also out there defending mutant rights. He's been fighting this legislation for some time now, and he's not in the best shape. But you know he has to be involved when the fate of mutant kind is at stake. He argues that if the mutant containment bill is passed, the American citizens will be taken prisoner for no other reason than the fact that they are different. Clearly, this is a gross violation of basic human rights. And Xavier also says that the mutants that Peter Gyrich is dubbed as terrorists have actually fought to protect ordinary humans. The heated debate triggers Gyrich as he shouts his mutant-hating propaganda, such as mutants want to control all humans. He also wonders why Professor Xavier cares for mutants so much, and even voices his suspicion about the possibility that he might be a mutant himself. Then, without any warning, he attacks Xavier with a small energy disruptor, and this causes Xavier to lose control of his powers immediately. He passes out and gets exposed as a mutant, and Gyrick is taken away by security. It's a shocking opening to the episode, and I think it gets even more dramatic when Cyclops, Wolverine, and Beast, who are in the audience, rush to Xavier's side, and Wolverine realizes that Xavier is dead. I was stunned by this turn of events, but of course, the episode had a lot more in store for the fans. Beast, Cyclops, and Wolverine then get Xavier onto the Blackbird as Gambit flies off. We have some relief as Beast examines Xavier carefully and tells Wolverine that his sense of smell was wrong this time and Xavier is still alive. Immediately after learning this, Cyclops contacts Jubilee and asks her to prepare the infirmary and get a live video feed to Moira McTaggart on Muir Island. Meanwhile, things get rather heated up on Genosha, where the mutants like Sunfire, Feral, and many others watch a news report about the attack on Professor Xavier. Sunfire is convinced now that Magneto was always right about humans, but Feral says that it was only the act of an individual. However, Sunfire doesn't buy into such peaceful resolutions anymore. He argues that Xavier was rich, respected, and normal looking, and even he suffered such a hateful attack, which means that the average mutants are doomed. According to him, the solution is to go to war with humans, and Magneto listens to these demands for war from afar. Back at the Xavier mansion, things are not looking so bright for the father figure and guide of the mutant superheroes. Storm tries to reassure Jubilee that Professor X has the best possible care in the hands of Beast and Moira McTaggart, but she's not convinced. Jubilee thinks that Storm and the X-Men are just trying to comfort her because she's so young, and she hates being treated like a child. It does turn out to be true when a discussion with Moira McTaggart reveals that Charles is beyond the help of medical science. So is there any hope left for him? Well, fortunately, Beast has the answer for this, and he knows that the Shi'ar have the technology that can save Professor Xavier from his near-death condition. But Lilandra lives in a distant alien world, and it's not easy to get in touch with her for help. Beast suggests that Jean's telepathic powers can be put to use to contact Lilandra, but Jean's telepathy wouldn't work across the galaxy. Ironically enough, only Xavier is able to communicate with Lilandra because of their strong personal bond, and currently, he's not of any help. But we soon find out that there are more disturbing things than Xavier's present condition. There are reports of mutants rioting all over the world, and the news anchor Trish Tilby calls these attacks unorganized and a part of a mutant rebellion. But without proper leadership, the rebellion is doomed, and we all know that there's someone who can be a leader to take up this rebellion and destroy humanity. As of now, in order to contain the growing resentment and violence, Morph takes the form of Xavier and goes on television to say that violence is never the answer. Of course, this isn't a long-term solution, and the X-Men have to find a way fast because time is running out. Cyclops realizes that they need to take care of Magneto before he spearheads the mutant resentment into something far deadlier. But it's already too late for that, because Magneto's addressing his followers right now. He tells them about the nature of human hate towards them, and he says that the world now belongs to mutant kind to be taken by force. It's a direct call for violence, and the crowd cheers as Magneto starts to see his dream uprising finally happening. I start wondering if the show's going to end on such a disastrous note, but Graduation Day has even more twists coming up. These are desperate times for the X-Men as they fight against time to send a message to Lilandra. Storm tells Cyclops that a regular message will take about 9 months to reach her, and this wouldn't work because Xavier barely has a few hours to live. To add to their worries, Cyclops calls Wolverine into the war room and informs him about Magneto having gathered an army on Genosha. He found out about this when Jean used Cerebro and Cyclops as a plan to deal with the crisis. If Magneto's attacked and defeated before the grand attack, his followers might be too demoralized to continue. Jean also wants to be a part of the mission, although Wolverine doesn't want her to come, knowing that this might well be a suicide mission. However, she's too determined and she intends to use her telekinetic force field to protect them. They head out to Genosha in the Blackbird, and Rogue and Gambit watch them fly off. Once they reach Genosha, Magneto nearly destroys the aircraft, but they jump out just in time to land safely. As Magneto prepares for a rousing speech, Wolverine, Jean, and Cyclops attack him after sneaking up behind him. Of course, he's not one to give up easily and he fights back. I love the next part because it's such a nice mix of raw action and emotion. During the fight, Magneto wonders why they're still trying to stop him after what humans have done to Xavier, and Cyclops says that this is what Xavier would have wanted. The man spent all his life in the peaceful coexistence of mutants and humans, and wouldn't want Magneto to throw it all away with this attack on humanity. He also tells Magneto that Xavier only has a few more hours before he's dead, and the real turning point comes when it's discovered that Magneto can enhance Jean's telepathic powers. He realizes that he might be the only one who can send the message and save his old friend, and finally, he relents. Back at the Xavier Mansion, the ambiance is heavy, and Beast informs everyone that Professor Xavier can pass away at any moment. But now Magneto is ready, and with the guidance of Beast, he uses his magnetic energy to expose Xavier's brain to the raw power. He wakes up momentarily and looks around. It's an emotional moment as he bids farewell to his friend Magneto and each member of the X-Men. And he says that he's proud to all of them before passing away in front of their eyes. It almost seems like he's really gone, but then suddenly a bright light fills the room and Lilandra appears. Magneto tries to tell her that she's too late to save Xavier, but she dismisses the cynicism because her people have the technology required to bring him back from the dead and cure him. But the only way he can survive is if he accompanies her to the Shi'ar Empire, which means that it is truly farewell for the X-Men. Her ship takes off with Xavier, and the wise old professor communicates with them telepathically, saying that he will always be there with them in spirit. Everyone watches as the spaceship disappears into the starry night sky, and it marks the end of an era as the story ends for X-Men the animated series. If you ask me, I expected a very different ending, where the X-Men would defeat some world-ending threat as a final boss fight. But it is still a closure, and it ends with Xavier being taken away from Earth in order to save him. Is it really how we would have wanted things to end? Hell no. But we weren't given a choice, and given all the factors that pushed the show to its untimely closure, which I'll discuss in the next segment, I think it's a decent effort to end on a high note that ensured any future revival would work wonders. Why did the show come to an end? Was it canceled? Well, let me make one thing clear from the onset. X-Men the Animated Series was too good and too successful a show to be canceled abruptly. I mean, a show that runs across 5 seasons for 76 episodes speaks for itself when it comes to popularity's quotient. So, we never had a random ending, even though many fans still complain about how the show could have taken its time to give us the closure. But it was never the case of one failed season or a declining popularity. When the show was first planned, not many people could foresee that it would have such an expanded run. Until the very end, this remained one of Fox Kids' strongest hits ever, and the ratings never really dropped. But it still had to end, and one could say that the show had run its due course, even though I would beg to disagree. The way I see it, the ending of X-Men the Animated Series was largely because of a complex combination of financial issues, corporate control disputes, production challenges, and Marvel's near bankruptcy. How else do you explain cutting the budget of such a flourishing show year by year? It's unfortunate that even Margaret, the passionate CEO, couldn't prevent the financial strain that affected the continuation. The showrunner Eric Lewald has said that on the record by season 5, some of the quality controls were lifted, the budgets went down, and they were cranked down. This did result in lower animation quality that we may have just ignored back then because of the pull of the story. I guess another significant blow is that the original animation studio that worked on the first 4 seasons had to be replaced because Fox could no longer afford them. As a result, the final season was outsourced to a cheaper overseas studio in the Philippines. It shows in the simplified character designs and the lack of detailing in the final season, and I consider this extremely unfair towards the loyal fanbase. And don't even get me started on the time lag and the random sequence of episodes. This one really hurt the show because the viewers wouldn't be clueless about the continuity at times. The writer, Julia Lewald, has talked about the time lags, especially during the earlier phases, that meant they were starting a month behind at times. What many don't realize is that the show was never supposed to have a 5th season. The original plan was to end things with the 4th season, where Beyond Good and Evil would be the big stage conclusion, with the defeat of Apocalypse. But when the decision was made to continue with a 5th season, the financial burden forced the changes that I just told you about, and there was never really a question of continuing this further because the resources simply weren't there. Also, you have to consider the impact of Marvel Comics collapsing into bankruptcy in 1996, and this meant that expensive animation was very difficult to sustain. With Marvel no longer a financial powerhouse, Saban Entertainment had to fund the show by themselves, and this was never feasible for a long run. Another primary reason behind the ending of the series with such great numbers on TV is not spoken about enough. There was a fight for control that almost grew unhealthy towards the end. Fox wasn't happy with the control of Marvel Studios over the narrative, and they tried to interfere with production throughout the series. They wanted many changes, such as lightening the tone, aligning the show with toy sales and merchandise in mind, and reducing the costs and maximizing the profits in general. I guess these are normal business plans, but for a show so creatively rich, these take a huge toll on those working hard to craft a masterpiece. Fox came down heavily on creative changes in Season 5, especially with Marvel's funding abilities significantly out of the picture. But the pressure led to a creative decline. Considering all this, I'd have to say that it was actually a good decision to end the show while it still had the reputation of being one of the best in the business, despite all the adversities. Graduation Day is a solid end to a fine series, and I don't think anyone would claim otherwise. What hurt the most was that the show was never officially canceled and it simply stopped because of external factors that could have been managed better. This is what makes the 2024 revival of the franchise with X-Men 97 on Disney Plus all the more special. We deserved a continuation of the story and we finally have it. The kid in me can finally rest easy. What are some of the major controversies that the show encountered? Earlier in the video, I did tell you that X-Men the Animated Series didn't flourish without its share of controversies. In fact, it almost took in many other share of controversies as well, such were the story elements. There was a lot of pressure to change the show narrative and make it younger, sillier, and dumb things down. But that's not the kind of controversy that I'm talking about here. Fox had very strict censorship rules, and they explicitly prohibited writers from referring to religion in an attempt to avoid offending many religious groups. However, the writing team comprised of a bunch of smart rebels who soon managed to break the law by introducing Nightcrawler as a devout Roman Catholic, where his faith was a key element. The censorship police brought down many other restrictions, such as objecting to fight scenes between Wolverine and Cyclops because the good guys apparently shouldn't fight amongst themselves. They also objected to Morph's death in the first season, and of course they had problems with all the flirting and sexual talk because the X-Men lived together at the X-Mansion as unmarried characters, which is considered immoral by certain groups. Thankfully, this was an era when people didn't get offended so often, and a lot of the restrictions were actually bypassed by the writers. However, what I find extremely amusing is that even with all the heavy censoring, there were rather risky scenes that snuck past the powers that would have stopped them. For instance, in the episode titled Till Death Do Us Part, Part 1, Morph returns disguised as Wolverine, and in his next transformation, Rogue, he seduces Gambit rather suggestively. Also, who can forget the raunchy CPR moment for an unconscious Cyclops in the episode Deadly Reunions? As for broader crackdowns, the show didn't have to endure much, except for some backlash from Christian groups for the portrayal of Nightcrawler. There were also some generic parental concerns about their kids watching such darker themes and high maturity levels of the narrative in general. I would say that this is both a good thing and a bad thing, that the primary controversies were internal. This meant that the show never faced major legal issues outside, but it also meant that the creative team was constantly suffocated, which eventually led to the end that we weren't prepared for it. What happened to the voice cast after the show ended? After a show as extensive as this, the fate of the cast is often a lingering question in my mind. These guys have given 5 years of their prime to this show, but where did they end up after? Well, unlike many others, the cast of X-Men the Animated Series mostly had it pretty good even after the show ended. Let me start with Cal Dodd, the actor who voiced Wolverine in the show. He continued working as a voiceover artist in various other animated shows, and eventually, he reprised his role as Wolverine in X-Men 97. I was thrilled because it would have been hard to imagine someone else filling these shoes. It's the same for many other returning cast members, and I think it was a masterstroke for X-Men 97, especially because the show intended to continue the story right from where they left off. Lenore Zan returned as Rogue, George Buza returned as Beast, and Allison Seeley Smith returned as Storm, and it was a treat for the fans. However, the same couldn't happen for Cyclops, because the voice actor who voiced the role, Norm Spencer, unfortunately passed away in 2020. Even Jean Grey was recast, and Catherine Disher, who was the voice for the character back then, did not reprise her role. However, she did have a pretty illustrious career after bagging a role on the Canadian TV series The Border. She's also worked for video games and animated series such as Sailor Moon and Resident Evil 3 Nemesis.
Gambit! Oh no!
What came next after the original cartoon ended? The quick answer to this would be a void that couldn't be filled. But, jokes apart, the show ended for good and there was no real continuity. You did have a couple of episodes in Spider-Man the Animated Series which had a shared universe, but that wasn't really a continuation of the story by any means. As I've said before, the success of the show was a clear indication for Marvel that X-Men was a goldmine that could be exploited. Over the years, we've had live-action films featuring the iconic Hugh Jackman as Wolverine, and there have been a series of hits and misses. None of them, however, continue the story as left behind by X-Men the Animated Series. It was only in X-Men 97 that a true direct continuation was put together, and this picks up after Xavier's departure and explores the team trying to survive without him. If you've watched the show, you'll know that he makes a grand comeback as well, and I guess it's time that I spoke about the best sequel to an animated series that I've ever watched. X-Men 97, the sequel that finally answered the ending. I don't know about you, but I've always wondered what the X-Men would be like without the guiding force of Professor Xavier. What happens when a free-spirited force of nature like Wolverine doesn't have someone that he actually respects and obeys? Well, we find out all about that in Season 1 of X-Men 97, where they pick up right after they left off. I can't express the kind of emotions that I felt when I watched this as an adult, and it felt like I watched the final episode of the 90s series last Saturday. So, the X-Men are trying to pick themselves up now that Xavier is gone, and Cyclops is the unsaid leader of the group. They have a lot to deal with, from Bastion and his new Sentinel program to internal struggles, including the revelation of Jean Grey's identity. The highlight of the first season, however, is the dramatic climax, which leaves the X-Men scattered across various timelines, from ancient Egypt to a distant future, setting up an epic clash with Apocalypse. The first season was honestly better than I'd hoped for, and I'm thrilled to check out the second season, which premieres on July 1st, 2026 on Disney+. The early reviews are already very promising, and given how the story's set, I'm quite sure the second season will be even better than its predecessor. In fact, you might also find it interesting that Marvel Comics has revealed about expanding the scope of this animated universe with a new spin-off comic called X-Men 97 Season 2. Just like the original X-Men 97 comic acted as a prequel to Season 1, this one will fill the gap between the seasons. The 5-issue series picks up right after the dramatic Season 1 finale, where the X-Men are scattered across time, and I think it's a really good initiative. It also shows the kind of interest that the fans have been showing because X-Men 97 has already been greenlit for Season 4, which is currently in development. Well, at least we won't have to wait so long for the next season after the second season ends. I've often wondered what the final episode of X-Men the Animated Series really signifies. As I've said before, it's not the kind of world-ending action to decimate a dreaded villain, but almost like a peace offering that settles things down. So what makes it so impactful? Well, for starters, I think the title Graduation Day couldn't have been more appropriate. This is the coming of age for Xavier's students who are now in the big league without his guidance. The X-Men graduate from students to the guardians of society that Professor Xavier always wanted them to be. He's guided them and mentored them for so long for this day, and finally the day comes when they have to figure out how to act independently and still stay true to the purpose that they've been trained for. More importantly, the episode also marks a crucial ending to the feud between Xavier and Magneto. These two old friends don't necessarily have similar thoughts when it comes to the idea of human-mutant coexistence, but Magneto learns to show mercy to honor the wishes of his friend. In fact, it's heartening to see him continue as a part of the X-Men in X-Men 97, where he returns to the group to continue the vision of Professor Xavier. Graduation Day might not be the flawless ending we expected, but it is still a better ending than many shows ever get. After all, what could be a better way to end the story than exploring the new world, where the X-Men are no longer just Xavier's pupils, but the future of mutant kind in a world that continues to be hostile to them. So there you have it. The combination of all the factors that made this show such a classic, and the story of how things really ended to continue its run many years later in X-Men 97. If I've managed to tempt you enough for a rerun, please don't deprive yourself and check out the episodes that still seem relevant in today's context. I know the animation quality's gotten better, as has the technological prowess of the industry, but I still don't see another show matching the impact of this 90s legend. It really did make our childhood special, and I hope that the ongoing X-Men 97 season lives up to the legacy and expectations of the fans. Let me know in the comments below what you think of this iconic animated series, and also share your thoughts on X-Men 97 as a successful follow-up. Please be sure to hit the like button and subscribe to our channel and ring that notification bell so when we post new videos, you find out first. Stay safe, have a great day.